10 costs that you only have in Brazil. Now, I've done many videos talking about how the cost of living is lower here in Brazil compared to many countries in Europe and the US. However, there are some things that I only have to spend money on living here in Brazil, which I didn't have to do when I was living in Europe. So let's have a look at these 10 costs. So the first one is private education. So I have a daughter and I send her to a private school here in Brazil. But had we been living in Europe, so I've lived in Sweden and also the UK, there's no way that I would have sent my daughter to a private school. And sending kids to private school here in Brazil is quite common. So they estimate about 20% of Brazilian kids go to private schools. And if you compare that to the UK or Sweden, it's much lower. So in the UK, it's about 6%. And in Sweden, it's less than 1% of kids go to private schools. And the reason why so many parents send their kids to a private school here in Brazil is the fact that the level of teaching and the resources available are much better in private schools compared to the public schools, especially in the big cities. So when we lived in some big cities here in Brazil and we were deciding where to send our daughter to school, I had a look at a couple of public schools and they were not the best. So I mean, the ones I saw, you could see that they just don't get enough funding, so they don't have enough money to maintain the buildings. Sometimes they don't have enough teachers, the class sizes are big, and they don't have enough resources to buy the equipment they need for IT, for sports and science and so on. And so you can see there's a big difference between these public schools and the private schools. But that's not the case in all areas. So if you look at the schools in the smaller towns in the countryside, especially in the south and southeast of Brazil, there you can have some better public schools where the local government's more organized and they're able to invest more in the schools. There the public schools can be a lot better, and maybe you don't need to send your kids to a private school. But my experience is that in the big cities, the schools can lack the necessary funding in order to offer a good level of teaching. Now, in terms of the cost of private schools, so here in Brazil, the average is around 1,000 reais to 3,000 reais per month. Now, if you compare that to cost of private education in Europe, so for example, in the UK, the cost of sending your child to a private school there can cost anything from like $30,000 to $100,000 per year. So you can say it's significantly cheaper to send your child to a school here in Brazil compared to many other countries. And obviously, Brazilians on average earn lower salaries than you do in Europe. But even taking into consideration the difference in salaries, private schools here in Brazil are still more affordable compared to other countries. And then another cost that you have here in Brazil related to kids is that you spend a lot of money on kids' birthday parties here in Brazil. So I'm used to kids' birthday parties being very simple and inexpensive, especially when the kids are very young. You just have a little party at home and you just invite, immediate family members and maybe a couple of kids from nursery, kindergarten, and it's a very simple little party. But here in Brazil, in general, these parties are very big, even when the kids are really small, so they're babies. Parents organize these big parties, so they hire a party venue. They have lots of decorations, lots of food, entertainers, and they invite the whole family, everyone from nursery and kindergarten. Also the friends of the parents as well are invited, and you have lots of guests and you end up spending a lot of money, which the baby doesn't even understand or appreciate. But yeah, when the kid gets a bit older, I guess they appreciate it. But still, I personally think these parties can be a bit over the top sometimes. Okay, and then number 3, another cost that I only have here in Brazil is private health insurance. So when I lived in Sweden and the UK, I didn't have any private health insurance. I just went to see public GPs, so general practitioners, and also public hospitals. Everything was free. And the level of care kind of varies. Sometimes it's good, sometimes it's not that good. And the waiting times can be a bit long as well. So I don't think the healthcare in Europe is perfect. It definitely isn't. But for me, it was good enough not to have to spend money on private healthcare. But here in Brazil, it's a different story. So Brazil does have a public health system. It's called SUS, S-U-S. And so you can go and see a doctor, have surgeries, and it's all free of charge. However, the standard of care and the waiting times and so on isn't the best. And my experience is it's a bit similar to the schools. that in the big cities, there the hospitals and the doctors and so on can be pretty bad, while in the smaller towns in the countryside, there it can be a lot better. And so because of the problems with the public health system, a lot of people have private healthcare here. So they estimate about 25% of Brazilians have private healthcare. So if you compare that to the UK, for example, it's between 11 and 14%. And then Sweden, it's between 7 and 14%. So you can see it's significantly higher in Brazil. Obviously, I'm not comparing it to the US here. I'm just comparing it against Europe, because the US is a completely different story. And in terms of the cost of private health insurance, now obviously this depends on the level of cover you want, the deductibles, so the excess, if you want to have a private room in hospitals, and obviously how old you are as well. But the average cost of health insurance in Brazil is between 300 reais to 2,000 reais per month. For me, for example, I spent 500 reais per month on my health insurance, which is $98. So for $98 per month, I can go and see a private doctor, usually on the same day. And I can also see specialists and go to a hospital and do surgeries. And it's no long waiting list or queues to have a surgery. So you can do them pretty quickly as well. So I think the private healthcare here in Brazil is really good and pretty reasonable as well. Okay, and the fourth cost they only have here in Brazil is security. Now, I'm not talking about bodyguards here, I'm talking about home security. So when I lived in some of the big cities here in Brazil, and we lived in a house, the house had a lot of security. The house had high fences around it, and then also a lot of people have electric fences as well. So if anyone tries to climb the fence, they get an electric shock. And you also have a large car gate, lots of cameras around the house, and also bars on the windows of the house as well. And then also what we had was a security guard on the street 24 hours a day. So all the neighbors on our street, we all agreed to pay for a security guard to be on our street, just walking up and down, patrolling it, because we felt that the policing wasn't sufficient, and be some incidents in the past, and so we paid for this security guard to be there. In terms of the cost, so each neighbor paid 600 reais per month, which is $118, and that paid for the salaries of 3 security guards. And so they rotated so that you always had someone on the street patrolling. Now, if you compare that to what I had in Sweden and the UK, what did we have there? We had a burglar alarm inside the house, and that was it. And so, yeah, we spent significantly more money on security here in Brazil, but that was only when we lived in the big cities. Now that we live in the countryside, here we don't have any of that. We don't have any high fences or electric fences, no bars on the window, and no security guard on the street. Because here where we live is just as safe as a small town in Sweden or in the UK. Okay, and cost number 5. Now, this isn't one that I've spent money on, but I know some people who have. And that is buying a armored or bulletproof car. So I have some friends who live in Sao Paulo, and they have these armored bulletproof cars. And so these cars are basically tanks, bulletproof windows, and then the doors and the sides of the car and everything as well is reinforced. And they do this to prevent carjackings while they're driving. Because in some of the big cities, this happens a lot, especially if you stop at a traffic light or you're in a traffic jam or something, and a motorbike just comes up next to your car, and then the guy just taps on your window with a gun and just tells you to roll down the window, give them your mobile and your wallet and everything, or sometimes they tell you to get out of the car because they want to steal the car. And so if your car is armored, then you can just sit in your car and go, no, I'm not doing that, and then just drive away. And they estimate about 400,000 cars are bulletproof armored cars. 85% of those are in Sao Paulo. So you can see the problem's pretty big in Sao Paulo, but it isn't cheap to buy or convert a car into an armored car. So they estimate the cost is between 65 and 100,000 reais. So that is $13,000 to $20,000. Convert a normal car into an armored car. Well, and also it doesn't protect you from everything. So when you're parking your car and getting in and out of a car, the criminal can still get you. Obviously, you can reduce that by just parking in private car parks, but that's not always possible. Okay, and another cost I only have here in Brazil is the cost of beauty treatment and cosmetic treatments. Now, I'm not talking about myself here, I'm talking about my wife. And so Brazilian women, they spend a lot of money on these things. So it's very common for them to have manicures and pedicures every week. They go to the hairdresser very often and do lots of things with their hair. I'm not completely sure what they do, but they do a lot of things. And it's also very common for them to go and do various skin treatments and laser hair removal, and then also plastic surgery as well. And they say that Brazil is the plastic surgery capital of the world. Now, I'm not sure about that, but I can definitely tell you there's a lot more plastic surgery happening here in Brazil than it is back in Sweden or the UK. I mean, I would say that the majority of Brazilian women I know have had some sort of plastic surgery, be that, Botox, liposuction, or enhancement of various things. So this is something that Brazilian women spend a lot of money on. And so yeah, if you're moving here to Brazil and you have a Brazilian girlfriend or a wife, then the chances are there'll be a lot more costs associated with these things. Okay, and then another cost I only have here in Brazil is bank fees. So here in Brazil, it's very common for banks to charge you a monthly fee for just having a bank account and a credit card. So I mean, all the big banks, you've got Bradesco, Banco do Brasil, Itaú, they'd love to charge you these monthly fees. And the fees can range from like 30 reais up to 100 reais. So that's like $6 to $20 per month. So the fees aren't massive, but they are very annoying, especially if you have lots of bank accounts. And this is something new to me because all the bank accounts I have in Europe, they don't charge me monthly fee. And I just find it funny how a bank can charge you these fees when you're giving your money to the bank. And they can use that money in various ways to profit from it. And then they still charge you a fee. I just think it's a bit greedy. But saying that, the banks do, by law, have to offer this essential services account, which doesn't have a fee, but it's very limited. You can only do a couple of transactions per month, and if you want a bank statement, you have to pay a fee and so on. But you can opt for that service, and then you don't have to pay a fee. And then also now you have lots of these internet banks which don't charge you a fee. So you've got Nubank, you've got C6 Bank, Interbank, and they don't charge a fee for a lot of their bank accounts. So what I personally recommend for anyone moving to Brazil here is to open up a bank account with one of the big high street banks, but go for the essential services account, which doesn't charge you a fee. And then you also open up a bank account with one of the big internet banks like Nubank or C6 Bank, which don't charge you a fee, and use that as your main bank account. Okay, and another cost I only incur here in Brazil, kind of related to banking fees, and that is notary office fees. And in Brazil, these are called cartórios or tabelionatos. And Brazil loves notary offices, and so you're constantly going to these notary offices to authenticate signatures and get authenticated copies of things like birth certificates and marriage certificates and so on. And obviously every time you go and do this, they charge you a fee. And again, this is a new cost for me because I never went to a notary office in Sweden or the UK. There you can just ask like a lawyer, an accountant or someone to just witness your signature, and you've got birth certificates and marriage certificates online, so you don't need to ask for authenticated copies and so on. So yeah, this is another cost that I had to incur. Now the costs aren't that big. I mean, it's like 10 to 30 reais, so that's like $2 to $6. But saying that, the fees can be very big when it comes to buying a house. Then again, you need to involve these notary offices because they need to do a background check on the buyer and the seller, and then they draw up the contract between the buyer and the seller, and then also they need to register the sale of the property and the new owner of property as well, and this can cost thousands of reais. So I mean, I remember when we bought our house, we spent over 5,000 reais on the cartório. So that is $1,000. Now obviously you have fees when you sell a house in Europe as well, but the fees were much bigger here in Brazil. And okay, another cost that I had here in Brazil, which I didn't have in Europe, and that is the cost of a cleaner. So here in Brazil, it's very common for people to have cleaners to clean their house. And we have that, so we have a cleaner that comes once a week, and we pay them 70 reais, which is $14. And that's for half a day to clean our house, which is pretty reasonable. I mean, it's more expensive if you live in the big cities, but still, it's a lot cheaper than what you would pay for a cleaner in many other countries. Now, when I lived in Sweden and the UK, we didn't have a cleaner. I mean, obviously many people do, but in these countries, there's more of a culture of people just cleaning their own houses rather than having a cleaner. It's only when I moved to Brazil and saw that everyone else was using cleaners that I'd start paying for a cleaner. Okay, and at number 10, and the final cost that I only have here in Brazil, is the cost of air conditioning. So I didn't have any air conditioning in my house in Sweden or in the UK. But here in Brazil, we have air conditioning in all the rooms. And during the summer, we use them a lot, because here it can get very hot and can go up to 40 degrees Celsius. And you basically can't live without air conditioning. In terms of the cost of air conditioning here in Brazil, so to buy an air conditioning unit, so one of these splits, it's about 2,000 reais, which is $400. So they're not that cheap here in Brazil. And then in terms of running it, so the cost of electricity, it depends on where you are in Brazil. But you can see here on this map that here in the south, in Rio Grande do Sul, the cost is 0.8 reais per kilowatt hour. So that is 16 cents per kilowatt hour. So if you compare that to Sweden and the UK, it's significantly cheaper. Now, obviously, in the south of Europe, you do have air conditioning. And then also in wintertime, you have much higher central heating costs in Northern Europe than you do here in Brazil, where the winters are pretty mild. Okay, so those are 10 costs that you only have here in Brazil. And obviously, a lot of these costs are discretionary and you don't have to spend money on it, and many Brazilians don't. And also, I'm just doing a comparison between Brazil and kind of Northern Europe and the UK. If you were to do this comparison with the US, it'd be completely different. And also, finally, even taking these costs into consideration, my cost of living is still lower here in Brazil than it was living in Europe and the US. So I hope you like this video. Please leave a like, subscribe. If you've got any comments or anything, leave in the comment section below. So thanks for watching. Until next time.